Madam Geok Choo, the wife of Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew and mother of Prime Minister Loong, has died. Mrs. Lee Kuan Yew was 89. Mrs. Lee had been seriously ill since suffering a massive stroke in May 2008.
Geok Choo was one of 8 children. An outstanding student at Methodist Girls' School, she also topped the 1936 Senior Cambridge examination for the whole of Malaya and Singapore. At Raffles Institution, she caught the attention of a young Lee Kuan Yew when she gave him unexpectedly stiff competition for a Queen's Scholarship. But academic rivalry aside, he knew he had found his equal and his soulmate. Their relationship grew through the years of Japanese occupation, and by September 1944, love had blossomed. When World War II ended, Mr. Lee left to study law in England in 1946, but he was miserable until she joined him at Cambridge University a year later. The two married secretly on 23rd December 1947. She had just turned 27 and he was 24.
You can't explain these things. He had tremendous aplomb. Self-confidence, very jaunty. He was a handsome young man.
When they returned to Singapore in 1950, they tied the knot again, this time with their parents' full knowledge. When Mr. Lee got more involved in politics and became Singapore's Prime Minister in 1959, it was Mrs. Lee and his younger brother, Lee Kuan Yew, who built up and expanded Lee & Lee, the law firm all three had set up in 1955. Mr. Lee once said his great advantage was that he had a wife who could be a sole breadwinner and bring the children up. That was his, quote, insurance policy, which allowed him to play the role he did in Singapore's history. In October 2003, Mrs. Lee suffered a stroke while on a visit to London. Fortunately, she made a swift recovery and was again seen in public at her husband's side, at community events and on official trips overseas. And she was there when Lee Hsien Loong was sworn in as Singapore's 3rd Prime Minister. Although she had shied away from a high profile, her contributions to Singapore had been most significant and pivotal to its history.
If she weren't an influence in my... Supposing I'd married somebody else, I might have become a different person. I mean, not that I would be a different person, but the things I would have been able to do, the kind of backdrop I would have had, family support would have been different.
And let's check in with our reporter S. Ramesh for more. Ramesh, what were some of the reflections Mr. Lee shared about his wife's illness?
Well, Gerard, Mr. Lee has shared his latest reflections in a wide-ranging interview which he gave to the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune just last month. In fact, Mr. Lee says that the stress of his wife's illness is harder on him than the stress he had faced for years in politics. Now, Mr. Lee also shared some insights on how he kept his wife company at night. Mr. Lee said he would tell her about his day's work, reading her some of her favorite poems, adding that she would keep awake for him until he returned home. But I would think that one of the most moving quotations which Mr. Lee gave to this interview is this, and I would like to quote what he had said. He says, "I had 61 years of happiness. We've got to go sometime, so I'm not sure who's going first, whether she or me. So I told her, I've been looking at the marriage vows of the Christians. The best I read was, and to quote, to love, to hold and to cherish in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, till death do us apart. I told her I would try and keep you company for as long as I can. And Mr. Lee says Mrs. Lee understood what he had said. Gerard.
And as we speak, Ramesh, do we have any word on funeral arrangements and where the public can pay their last respects?
Yes, indeed. The Prime Minister's office has issued a statement on this. The Prime Minister's office says that the wake is going to be held at Sri Temasek. Now, that's the official residence of the Prime Minister, and that's located inside the Istana grounds. The wake is on Monday and Tuesday, and visitors who wish to pay their respects, they can do so from 10 in the morning till 5 in the evening. There will be a private funeral, and this is going to take place on Wednesday at the Mandai Crematorium. Now, the family has also requested that no obituaries and no wreaths or flowers are to be sent. And they say all donations will go to the National Neuroscience Institute Health Research Endowment Fund. Gerard.
All right, thanks, Ramesh. Now, as we speak, we have gotten word that Prime Minister Hsien Loong has cut short his trip at the Asia-Europe meeting in Brussels. Our reporter Imelda Saad has the latest.
Now, as you can imagine, it was a scramble to get Mr. Lee back home. He arrived here at his hotel in Brussels at about 10:30 this morning, and barely 2 hours later, the local media got wind of Mrs. Lee's death, and we were told that Mr. Lee would be cutting short his trip here in Brussels. Now, here's what we know. Mr. Lee will be leaving this very same evening. He'll be accompanied by his wife, Madam Ho Ching, and his principal private secretary, Mandai Yew. Now, as for Singapore's participation at the Asia-Europe meeting, now that's still being finalized. Mr. Lee was to have toured PSA's operations at Antwerp, but that, I understand, has been taken over by Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Lim Hui Hua, who's also here in Brussels. Now, Mr. Lee was also scheduled to have had several high-level bilateral meetings with European and Belgian leaders and also deliver a speech at the Asia-Europe Business Forum. Now, the Asia-Europe meeting starts proper on Monday, but of course without the participation of the Prime Minister. Imelda Saad, Channel News Asia, Brussels.